Welcome everyone. I'm Ken Chad and we're here today to listen to Natasha, who's going to talk about picture books on autistic children. I'm Ken Chad, so my interest here is really from my library background. I work a lot with libraries. For some time I was a children's librarian, so this is close to my heart too. And what I'm going to do now is introduce Natasha. I'll stop sharing this screen and introduce Natasha, and I'll let you carry on.
Okay. Hello, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. As Ken has said, it's being recorded, so if you wanted to share it with any friends or colleagues afterwards, you are free to do that. So yes, I'm kind of just I won't talk to you for too long, hopefully. Although I can witter about this for a long time because it's a real passion project. So I thought I'd just give you a bit of background really about myself first, and then talk about the work that I've been doing. So I became interested in autism back in kind of 1995, 1996, when I started my teacher training. I was a primary school teacher, and I taught predominantly in Newham, but I taught in Harlow for a little bit as well, and I did behaviour support and various other roles. I was inclusion manager, if you like, and a literacy lead. And what I was finding was we were getting more children coming into mainstream primary schools who were autistic, and there weren't really any books around to support them in their journey, which I found infuriating. And because I've always used books to help children and adults actually kind of navigate maybe something that could be a little bit tricky for them or new for them. So I was wearing that hat already. Then I became a parent, and with our second child, if we're really honest about it, from the moment she was born, and she has given me permission to talk about her, from the moment that Holly was born, we knew that she was different because she was so different from our eldest. And by 2, we were pretty sure that she was autistic. But, you know, she's 24. So back then, getting a diagnosis for a very young child was nigh on impossible. Anyway, getting a diagnosis for a young girl, even trickier. So we kind of left it, and we did a lot of our own reading, but we still couldn't find anything to share with Holly to get her to understand maybe why she was different. And also, in way more importantly, and I'll talk about it later as well, to share with her older sister, Alice, for her to understand why her sister was so different from her and from her friends. And it was infuriating, if I'm honest. And then I became a bookseller as well. So I've had a bookshop for 13 years. And a big remit for us was to do with inclusivity here, to have books that celebrated a broad range of diversities, not just neurotypes, but cultural backgrounds as well. And I will say that the children's book market, I think, is leading the way. There's a lot out there, but not all of it is great. Not all of it is that easy to get hold of in the UK, and that can be a cause of frustration as well. So that's kind of my background, and I decided on a whim, almost really, in a moment of madness, that the thing to do would be to do a PhD on this, and looking at the representation and the reception of autistic children in picture books. Because then, when I'm complaining to publishers, which I do a fair amount, it's coming from a place of research rather than just, oh, there's Natasha having a bit of a moan again. So that's what I did. And that process started 3.5 years ago. So I've just passed my Viva. I'm now in the thick of doing some edits. But I'm nearly there. And what I want to do with you today really is kind of share very, very briefly what autism is. I know that you probably all know what autism is, but just to maybe for a little bit of clarification, talk briefly about the context of where we are in the UK at the moment in terms of numbers, talk a little bit about language, then the power of picture books, and share a little bit of my research with you as well, which hopefully will be maybe a useful tool for you in any of your settings, I think this can work just as well for parents and librarians and teachers, anyone who's interested in this topic. Hopefully you'll get something out of it. But I'll try not to talk at you for very long. And then if you've got any questions, you can ask questions. So now I have to hope that I can do the technology. Well, you'll soon realise in about 30 seconds that myself and technology are not always the best of friends, because it scares me and it knows it scares me. Right, there we are. Okay, so this is from the National Autistic Society in 2024. It just says, autism is a lifelong developmental disability which affects how people communicate and interact with the world. And in a nutshell, that is absolutely true. It's not wrong, but it's also not particularly useful if you've never come across somebody who's autistic before. So I think the key things for me are the fact that it's heterogeneous, which means that if you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person. They're all different. There is that spectrum. Things of language around autism has changed quite a lot. At one point, you were called kind of like low functioning up to high functioning. That's all gone because it's quite divisive. But the reality is that there is a broad spectrum of levels of need within a diagnosis. And media has not done the autistic community any favours. It's getting much better. If you've never seen it, there is a fantastic series called A Kind of Spark by Elle McNichol. It came out as a middle grade book first. It's been a huge success and it's wonderful. Elle is autistic herself, so the characters that she writes about are really authentic and they portray autism as what it can be for some people. So it's definitely worth a watch. And I think one of the most important things to remember, though, is that the challenges and strengths that come with autism are quite fluid and for lots of different reasons. So it comes down to hormones, how tired you are, what kind of day you've had, the input that you've had, how old you are. It doesn't mean that you grow in and out of autism. Of course not. If you're autistic, then that's it for life. But at different times in your life, there might be peaks and troughs and moments when you can kind of manage your autistic traits easier than others. And also a lot of it does come down to how other people interact with you. So very quickly, this is the DSM. So the DSM-5 is the newest iteration of what clinicians are looking for. So if you're looking for a diagnosis, these are the key strands that they're looking for to say yes or no. And they're broken down into two broad areas, which is a kind of a conversation for another day, but I'll quickly go through it now. So the social communication and interaction, you'll see you need to have all three of those ticks, if you like, to get a diagnosis. So social, emotional reciprocity, never said that properly. That just comes down to it's that back and forth and how easy that is for somebody. Developing, maintaining and understanding relationships. And I think this one is really interesting, purely anecdotal from point of view of our daughter. If you don't know Holly very well, the majority of people will say to me, well, she's not really autistic, is she? Because surface level, lots of friends, very sociable, very personable, really funny, very outgoing. But what you don't see if you don't know her is the burnout that comes from that masking of being almost the poster girl for what autism can be, of this kind of like everything's fine. And then the non-verbal communicative behaviour. So that doesn't mean that you can't talk, but it's all the other things, the habits, that like maybe picking your nails a little bit, having a bit of a fidget. It could be, it's such a broad area that these criteria on their own are not particularly useful, which is why you need someone who knows what they're talking about to help you through a diagnosis. And then for the other half of it is to do with your patterns of behaviour and interest, and you only need two of these. So stereotyped and repetitive motor movements, so that can be stimming basically, and stimming comes in a broad range, which is why especially in girls it wasn't picked up on as much, because some of the stims maybe that a girl has are just seen as things that young girls do anyway. So twirling their hair, picking their nails, those kind of things may just be, you might not pick up on them. And it does not mean, of course, that if you've got a little girl who twirls their hair that is autistic. They might just twirl their hair. but it can be indicative with the other things as well. Routines and ritualized patterns of behavior. I think that one's key, I would say, although you don't need it for the diagnosis. I'm not sure that I've ever met an autistic person who finds that easy. There's a need to know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And if it's going to change, the change needs to be known about, ideally in advance. Obviously, that can't always happen. Highly restricted interest, so that special interest. Now, this is where the media comes in and played a very poor part. So if you think about, if you've seen films like Rain Man, a great film entertainment-wise, there's no doubt about that. But what it did at the time was it kind of portrayed that if you were autistic, then you were a savant. You could drop a packet of matches on the floor and instantly know how many you dropped. You could memorize the timetable for any airline and you would just know it. Now, it's not saying that autistic people, some autistic people, don't have those strengths. But I think what's really important is that not all do. And a highly restricted interest can be transient, just like I said before, in terms of your challenges and strengths. You may not stick to the same one the whole way through. Might start as dinosaurs, might end up as musical theatre. It just depends on how you grow as a person. And then sensory sensitivities. So that could be down to clothing. If there are labels in there that might really cause aggravation, or that you need to wear your shoes super tight or super loose. It might be that certain scents and aromas really bother you. Quite often autistic people do have really heightened sensory sensitivities, so they might be able to hear things that other people can't hear. I did my research, I spoke to 21 children sharing some picture books, and one of the boys who was autistic said that when he's in assembly, and it was so beautiful. This boy was 10 years old and his vocabulary was wonderful. And he said to me that people just don't get it. It was like an ambience, not an ambulance, an ambience in his ear, that he could hear all of these sounds coming from all of these other places that nobody else picked up on. And that for him was a real challenge and a struggle because other people couldn't see it. And that's one of the issues with autism, is that it can be a hidden disability. Lots of autistic people don't like to call it disability, and that's absolute preference, but it is noted as a disability. And as such, we need to be mindful of the fact that you can't just see it in somebody. Anyway, waffle. So this is the context. So it's slightly out of date now, but in the last 20 years, there has been a 787% increase in recorded incidents of autism diagnosis. That is huge. Now, the thing is, that's just the diagnosis. We're another 5 years on now. They're the people that have been diagnosed, not the ones that are waiting for diagnosis, which is a whole other conversation, isn't it? Because that's taking forever. Should take 16 weeks maximum. We know that's not happening. And there's been lots of questions about this. Oh, everybody's autistic these days. And you've probably heard that, that people go, well, everyone's got something, or everyone's a little bit autistic. No, you wouldn't say everyone's a little bit diabetic, would you? Or everyone's a little bit pregnant, or, you know, it's just, it's a nonsense. And there are lots of different complex reasons behind the rise. I won't go into all of them, but one of them, the most obvious one really, is to do with genetics. Autistic people are having children. There is a genetic strand in there. It doesn't make sense that they're going to have autistic children, and those children are going to have autistic children. It just makes sense. Population is increasing, therefore the autistic population is increasing. But one of the biggest things really is to do with the diagnostic tools. They've improved vastly, thank goodness, over the last 20, 25 years, making it much more accessible for you to get a diagnosis. There's a much greater understanding of what autism is and what it isn't as well. And so it makes sense, doesn't it, that there's going to be an increase. I read a really beautiful analogy, and I'm really sorry, but I can't remember who it was. But the paraphrasing of it was, questioning why there are more autism diagnoses is like questioning why there are more stars in the sky now that we have more powerful telescopes. And that's what it is. The lens has shifted and we've got more of an understanding of what it is. So that's kind of the overall context just for the UK, but that's not that different anywhere else in the world. Right, language. So there's a couple of things that aren't on here which I'll talk about first, and language is a really tricky one. Language is ever evolving, as we know. I teach here, and sometimes the kids say things to me and I'm like, I'm gonna have to look that up. But there are things that are really important. So the things that aren't on here to be mindful of is to say that autism or any disability is a difference, not a disorder. That word disorder is so negative, such negative connotations, and not helpful at all. And that it's an experience rather than a deficit. The medical model is still very much looking at deficits. That is hugely negative. That isn't to say that we shouldn't acknowledge the fact that there are challenges, and some of those challenges are small and some of those challenges are huge, and it can be very, very difficult. But to call it a deficit, that doesn't sit well with me. These infographics I've stolen. You can see there's one from the Able Fables and one from Lived Experience Educator. So the one on the sage green talks about person first and identity first. And this is hugely personal. So person first means saying, I am a person with a disability. Whereas identity first is, I am disabled. So, and neither of them are wrong. But just like we're living in a world now, quite rightly, where we may have to check somebody's pronouns, ask. That's the best thing to do. I had a wonderful experience here a couple of years ago with an author and an activist and a writer, obviously a writer, I've just said author, actress is what I meant to say, called Chloe Hayden. And she spoke to 50 people while she was here. It was fantastic. And one of the first things she said was, ask. If you don't know what that person wants to be addressed as, then just ask. They're not going to be offended. And I think that's true. So it's not that one's right or one's wrong. It's just personal preference. And this one as well, this is something that trips people up quite a lot, I think. So you can see on the black infographic, you've got all these little people. So you've got autistic, OCD, ADHD, BBD, epilepsy. Obviously, there's a lot more than that. So each individual is neurodivergent, but then the group at the bottom is neurodiverse. And there is a difference between the two. No one's going to be horribly upset with you if you've got it wrong, but it's just, I think language is super important, and it's about trying to be, I guess, as positive as possible and mindful to what people's preferences are. So that was the language bit. I'm going to go on to the fun stuff now, I promise. Right, the books. So this is what it's all about. So my research, I interviewed 21 children, and there was an even split of autistic children and holistic children. They're primary school age, so the youngest was 6, oldest was 11. I also interviewed 7 primary school teachers. 1 works in a specialist school, and the others are all in mainstream, to get a kind of a better picture, really, of where we're at the moment. And what I wanted to see from the children, or what I wanted to find out from the children, was, did they think that picture books in particular were a useful tool, if you like, and did they have an impact on those children, and kind of, had they come across any before? And I'll give you statistics first, and then we'll talk about this a little bit about what's on there. So at the beginning of the research, when I interviewed all of the children, so I interviewed them all on a one-to-one, and then in each school cohort, they also had a group session as well. So they heard the story twice. In the mainstream school, we read Leo and the Octopus, which you can see there, which is by Isabel Marinoff and Chris Nixon. And I also worked in a specialist school, and we read A Friend for Henry. And the only reason that it wasn't the same book is because the specialist school had done a whole block on Leo and the Octopus, and the head teacher felt that if I went in with Leo and the Octopus, some of the children might just go, oh, I know this book already, I want to do something else. So that was the reason that there was a difference. If at the time Gina Kaminsky Saves the Wolf had been published, I 100% would have used that book. It's fabulous, and I'll show you a still of it at the end, and you'll understand why it's so wonderful. But before I read any of the books to the children, I asked them if they could explain what they felt autism was. And 53% of those children could articulate in some level what they thought autism was. They weren't all correct necessarily, But 53%, not too bad. By the end of it, bearing in mind they'd only met me for one day and we'd had the story twice and obviously some chat as well, but I never told them what autism was. It all came from them. That had gone up to 75%. So if you can imagine what impact some of these books could have on children who had repeated readings of these books, maybe it was part of, you know, a group or a class or even a whole school project or something that they even read at home, but it was just one of the books that was just within their book collection. Just think about what the impact would be, and that's what really excites me. So at the top here, there's a quote from Spear, Reynolds, Swallow and Zaks. It's 2009, but it's not out of date. I'm not going to read it out to you. You can all read. But the essence is really saying that all books, but picture books, those ones that are super visual, when you read them, part of your brain processes it as if it is something that you have really experienced. And that is hugely powerful, isn't it? By the end of all of it, 100%, so all of the teachers and all of the children that I spoke to all said that they wanted more books to quote, to represent every single one of our children. That's what one of the teachers said. And the majority of them also said that they hadn't come across very many. And when they were looking, they found it really difficult, which is another issue, which I'm trying to work on, is that there are lots of blog posts, very well-meaning ones, and lots of lists. If you do a quick Google search, picture book with autistic characters, you'll get loads. The problem is that the quality varies greatly. I have my hands up, I'm an absolute book snob, so it may be that it doesn't work for me, but it works for a child, but the representation has to be correct, right? It can't be stereotypes. That's not helpful for anybody. And the other issue is that some of the lists are just really out of date, so you can't necessarily get the books anymore. You might be able to get them out of the library, but you might not. And if you're a teacher or a librarian looking for those books, you haven't got time to waste trying to find books, then finding out that you can't buy them, or them arriving and you going, hang on a minute, this doesn't quite sit right. I do that here quite a lot, and then I just send them back, but other people don't have that luxury of time. So what I decided to do was to create a rubric to help that process. So a rubric, in essence, is kind of like a grid, really, with questions on. It can vary hugely, so it could be that it's a scoring system, and the higher the score, the better. I didn't do a scoring system. I wanted to make it as simple as possible, but I did come up with 4 key questions to kind of kickstart conversations, and then it went into much more depth later on. I'm not going to share all of it with you because you might fall asleep, but I will share the beginning with you. It's based on work by Kleekamp and Sabata, and also by Menchetti. Their rubrics are very useful, but they're much broader. So they're about disability generally, whereas mine is specifically about autism. I will say, and I should have said at the beginning, I think most of what I'm saying can be used for any disability, or in fact, any kind of difference that you might want to help support. But because of my background and because of the nature of a PhD, it has to be as narrow, not in a negative way, but you have to kind of really focus in on something. So I've stuck to picture books because picture books you can use from very, very young, but actually up to quite old. I mean, I've used picture books, especially books, say, by Anthony Brown. I've used those with year 9, year 10 students. And I think they've definitely got their place as long as they're being used correctly. So that's why I did that. So there's a little selection here of ones that I highly recommend. If you've not come across any of these before, then go and get them from your library or from your local bookshop. Please don't buy them from Amazon. Mr. Bezos has got enough money. So Gina Kaminsky Saves the Wolf is absolutely stunning as a book. Really, really interesting. And she is very sassy. She knows her own mind. She knows what she wants. There's a lot of humour in the book. And it's a really clever read. Craig Bargreen, who's the author, and Francis Martin, the illustrator, have worked really closely together to kind of depict what a classroom can really look like. Slightly chaotic sometimes. There's a use of emojis in there, which are really useful as well, that Gina uses to show people. She breaks the fourth wall quite a lot to show the reader how she's feeling. It's very clever. Leo and the Octopus is probably one of my favourite picture books of all time. I know it inside out now. It's about a little boy called Leo, and he finds the world a little bit tricky. It's too loud, it's too busy. He just wants to shut things out, and he meets Maya, who is an octopus, and they kind of don't become friends. It's not a fantasy. She is a regular octopus, but he learns to celebrate himself, and I think that's really beautiful. Friend for Henry is kind of what it says on the tin, really. He's at school and he really wants to make a friend, but he's got a very strict list of criteria. Quite right too, I think. And it's just about him navigating that experience. Lillian Miles and Torch, that's really beautiful as well. Again, another one with a girl protagonist. There are more picture books coming out now with female protagonists, but they're few and far between. But this one's a really good one. It also introduces the idea of having a dog as a support animal to help Lily kind of navigate the world. And then Talking Is Not My Thing by Rose Robbins. I'm not sure if she's a cat, a fox, I don't know what she is, but whatever she is pre-verbal, but she still very much gets her voice across, and that's what's really important as well. So I'm just going to share the beginning of the rubric with you. I'm conscious how long I've already been talking at you for. So these are the first things. So the first one, I know I called it one question, but it's a bit of a lie really, because there's a few questions within it. So but they're just things to think about if you've got the luxury of some time, and maybe you've got a selection of books and you're talking to staff if you're in a school or library setting, or even if you're choosing books at home, and you've managed to get a couple of books to look at. These are the things to maybe think about. How is the life of the autistic character represented as multi-dimensional? Fine, celebrate their autism, talk about their autism, but if that's it, if that's all they are, is that enough? Short answer, no, not really. Are these characters richly layered? Is there more to them? Could you look at them and think, oh, that sounds like a real person? So like with Gina Kaminsky, that I first read that book and I actually got quite teary as a 52-year-old, because I was like, oh my God, this character is my daughter. This is what she was like at primary school. That's what you want. You want to see a connection. Whose voice is presented and emphasised in the telling of the story. Now, that doesn't mean that the autistic character has to tell their own story, but you do need to hear their voice. It shouldn't be that they are being represented by someone else. Obviously, they're getting represented by someone else because they're getting represented by the author, but you want to be able to hear what they've got to say. How are readers positioned to think and feel about the autistic character? So I've put in there, avoid othering. And othering isn't just about disability, it's about race, it's about culture, it's about religion. You don't want your autistic character here and everyone else here. That isn't how it should be. And there are a lot of books that are like that. And then there's this kind of idea, maybe, of a saviour, of somebody coming in and swooping and rescuing that character. Oh, don't worry about you being autistic. I'll accept you anyway. No, that is not a good enough representation for me. And what steps has the author taken to create and present authentic relationships? So again, it's about that hierarchy. Do you want someone who's just showing pity, or feeling a little bit sorry for them, or stepping in and rescuing them? Hopefully not. That's not really what you want. That shouldn't be. That happens sometimes, and in life that happens too, but that's not what we want to show our children, is it? That's what it means to be autistic or different in any other way. It should be that the relationships are balanced. And obviously it also depends on who you're wanting to support. Because if it's a child who's, say, really struggling with friendships, then something like Leo and the Octopus and A Friend for Henry are absolutely fantastic for that, because that's kind of the core of what those stories are about. But if it's a child that's struggling, say, with the classroom being really quite noisy and overwhelming, Gina Kaminsky Saves the Wolf is great for that, because that's exactly what happens to her. And she has a really nurturing experience in her school. And actually, she coped really well. But the main thing is, with all of these stories, is that those autistic characters don't feel pressure to change who they are. They don't become someone else at the end. They are still themselves, and they accept who they are. And I think that's really the power, for me, of picture books. So I just wanted to show you two what's the word? Pages, double page spreads from the book. So this is from Leo and the Octopus. I just think this is beautiful. So Leo is this little guy here, and you can see he's covering his ears. He's not looking overly happy. It says the world was too bright for Leo and too loud. I must be living on the wrong planet, he thought. None of the other children understood Leo, and he didn't understand them. So we feel empathy for him, but I wouldn't say we feel sorry for him as in terms of, oh, poor you. But I do think we feel empathy for him here. And then the story goes on. He's at the aquarium at this point. There's just loads of noise and loads of kids, and it's all a bit too much. And then he ends up he finds Maya the octopus, and he kind of finds himself and finds something that he's passionate about. It's also got a fantastic double page thread in it about his special interest and how he navigates that. And it's glorious. Please find this book. It's so lovely. And the other one, this is from Gina Kaminsky, and you'll see, I just think her little face says it all. So this, for me, is an absolute snapshot of what a primary school classroom can look like. I think many of my primary school classrooms, when I was a classroom teacher, looked like this. And there she is, front and centre. And you can see on her table what's really clever. The emojis are there. So it's a little nod. These are the things that she uses. And she's explaining why she is not happy in this classroom situation today. School is rubbish today. And I think that's important. Not just school is rubbish. She's not saying she hates school. Today. And then she tells you why. There are 3 reasons why. 1, classroom is too hot. 2, the classroom is too smelly. 3, worst of all, the classroom is too loud. Using my charts, I feel like this. And then she's got that little emoji there. And that just says so much. It's kind of echoing her little face. But you can see this kind of carnage, this chaos around her. I love this one. The little boy under the desk picking his nose. Little boy swinging off the chair. Someone else has spilled everything. It's just chaos. But she's able to explain beautifully why she's not happy. No one else is doing it for her. She's telling you why. And then in the story, she goes off, she gets taken out. Not because she's done anything wrong, but to help her regulate, basically, to help herself regulate. And she chooses a book, and she chooses Little Red Riding Hood, and she gets Little Red Riding Hood. I can't remember, but anyway, she chooses one of them, and she gets very frustrated that basically the wolf has got it all wrong. He's approaching the whole thing the wrong way, and she steps into the story. So there's a bit of metafiction in there. She steps into the story, and she sorts out the wolf's behaviour, and then she's self-regulated, and she returns back to the class, and it's just is an absolute joy. So that, in a nutshell, is what I've been banging on about for the last, I don't know how long, decade probably of my life, probably longer. And I am very, very passionate about it because I really do think that children's picture books are glorious in many different ways. They don't have to be used in a scheme of work. It can just be a case of sitting down and reading a story with a child, and that's magical, isn't it? How lucky are we that we get to do that? Anyway, so I'm going to stop waffling at you now and turn this off, if I remember how. See, technology. And hopefully Ken will pop back on again. And if anyone's got anything that they would like to ask, make it easy. Please do, and I will try my best to answer it for you.
Can I ask a question, Natasha?
Of course.
I thought, thanks for that. First, that introduction to autism itself, and walking us through a few examples, I think was really helpful to get a sense of what you're meaning in terms of that rubric. But is there, so we've got a few examples. Is there wider lists that people could get in contact with? Are there? Here are some good example lists.
I am very happy to share lists. So if anybody feels like they need any guidance, then all the contact details have been given out already, I think, but we'll come back to them at the end. And I'm very happy to share those lists. I think, as I said, there are a lot of lists. You can find loads of lists. And some of them are fantastic, but quite often what happens is they become outdated. And, our understanding of autism has shifted so much. If you get a picture book that was written 15 years ago, not that there was really much around anyway, it just may not be quite right anymore. And it may be you can't get it anyway. There is a really good publication, which a lot of you probably know, called Pen and Ink. with INC, and that is wonderful. It's free, marvelous. Do like free, and it comes out. I think it's quarterly. You can just sign up for it. They do amazing work, and they send it out. It's all different types of diversities, and they list books, but with a little bit of information about them and what the topic is that they're covering as well. So if you haven't come across that before, it's worth having a look. Pen and Ink, it's called.
And just let me barge in with another one if I can.
Yeah, please do.
So I was interested in what you said earlier about advocating to publishers and using your research and not just sort of agging them, but you've got some research. Do you think publishers are really responding to this well or enough?
I think there has definitely been a huge improvement even since I started my research. So that's got nothing to do with my work. That's just, that has happened. That's down to people like, say, Elle McNichol, who is an amazing advocate for autistic people, and she's saying this isn't good enough. I do think children's publishing is leading the way, not just in terms of autism, but our bookshop is a general bookshop, but we do specialise in children. And I think that for a long time, children's books have been much better. I think children's authors are much more on the ball. Don't want to offend anyone who's not children's author. It's an adult one. I think it's an easier market. Maybe it's an easier thing to sell into. I do think that publishers are listening, but it takes time. I mean, a book takes 2 years from being first draft to publication anyway, so it's never going to be a quick process. And there are lots of people that have done self-published. I'm not admonishing that at all. There are some wonderful self-published books out there, but there are also some that maybe aren't so great, and that comes down to the fact that maybe they haven't had a sensitivity reader, or they're a bit outdated, or they're very focused in on one particular experience that an author has had because it's very personal to them. It may not always be put across maybe appropriately, but that is not to say that I don't like self-published books, because I do, and I think that they've got a really important place within the book world. But there's lots of traditionally published books that I send back on a regular basis where once I've read it, I've just thought, absolutely not having that on the shelf here, because it's not quite right. I'm picky.
So final question really, and it comes from my background as a librarian, as I say, working with children's services to schools. Have you got any advice to librarians about how they can contribute to making this world better, really, in terms of picture books for autistic children?
Well, I think librarians are magical. I really do. We're very, very lucky here because we've got 2 libraries. We've got Brentwood Library and Shenfield Library. They've both got wonderful children's departments. I think it's just being open to seeing what's out there, and don't just get a book in because it's on a list and put it on the shelf. Read it. I mean, it's as simple as that. Just read it before you share it. And if you don't think it's quite right, I'm very happy to pitch in. But seek some advice. Seek some advice from from an autistic child, if they're like older, or a parent of an autistic child. What do you think? I found this. What do you think of it? It's having those conversations is so important. It can't be done. It's a mammoth task, isn't it, Ken? So it shouldn't be done in a bubble. It should be a shared experience. But if you then find those books, then share them with your team. There's no point in having one person who's maybe considered an expert. What if they're not in that day? We need to share that expertise or that knowledge, which librarians have a huge wealth of, with as many people as possible. I even tried to do that in the bookshop, which is completely different. We're a very small team, but new things come in, and my staff are always told, right, this is the new stuff that's come in. This is why I've chosen it. This is why it's important. And sharing that information.
Thanks, Natasha. We'll wrap up, and I just want to say once again, thanks. I found that very useful and very interesting, and I also think your specific advice, if you like, around autism definitely has wider applicability elsewhere, and long live picture books, I'd say. And so thanks very much. And if anyone needs contact details, they'll be in the webinar information, and we'll this recording will be made available to all registrants. So thanks to everybody. Thanks, Natasha. And please, everybody, stay in touch if you need any more information. But at that point, I'll end the webinar. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much for listening. Oh, you're welcome, Helen. But if anyone's got any questions afterwards, I'm very happy for people to, email me and ask if you haven't got time now. Not a problem at all.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.